I'd like to now introduce Pascaline Dupas, who I think I don't know if everybody has your bios, but I think some of our bios are out of date. You are also in transition, right? Am I right? Career-wise? No, you're not? Yes. Okay. So I think Pascaline is who was a early member of SEGA. And has done very interesting work that on linking health and health, behavior, and microfinance, is transitioning now from UCLA to Stanford, when we're very glad because we'll have her closer. So thanks, Pascaline.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. This has been a really great symposium so far. I'm honored to be on the program, and I wanted to start by thanking all of you for being here, and also thanking the SIGA staff for putting this great day together. My talk today is going to be on women and their money, and in particular, I'm going to be looking at the impacts of enabling women to save. And I'm going to be focusing on women in Sub-Saharan Africa. So to start, I wanted to give you some striking numbers. According to a recent Gallup survey, only about 16% of women in Sub-Saharan Africa have bank accounts. And if you look actually in rural areas, you find that account ownership rates are even lower. So I have here some numbers that come from various household surveys that have been done by SIGA-affiliated studies. And we find that in Uganda or Malawi, fewer than 3% of women actually have a bank account. To date, in Malawi, it's fewer than 4%, and in Kenya, it's lower than 10%. So now, what do these numbers mean? Does it mean that it's hard for women to save? Well, not necessarily, because in theory, we don't need a bank account to save. Maybe we just need a mattress or a pillow, or we can dig a hole in the ground and put the money in there. So, in fact, if you look at women in Sub-Saharan Africa, including very poor women, they seem to be using a plethora of informal saving mechanisms to save. They do save under the mattress or in the folds of their clothes. They can also invest in animals, and some animals are really cheap, like chicken. You can just buy one of them. It's not that expensive, and you can save through that. There are also the phenomenon of susus in West Africa. These are essentially deposit collectors that come to your house and take your money that you want to save, and they hold on to it until you need it, and then you can find a way to get in touch with them, and they bring your money back. And also a very common way of saving for women are Roscas. These are some sort of saving clubs that work as merry-go-rounds. So let's say we are 10 of us, we're a club, we meet once a week, we all contribute 10 cents. That makes a pot of $1, and one of us is going to walk out of the meeting with that pot of $1. So on the days of the meeting where you just put the 10 cents in and you don't get the $1, you are saving into a fund. But on the day you walk out of the meeting with the $1, it's essentially the same as cashing on your savings. So these mechanisms are there. Now the problem is that they are all somewhat risky or costly. So if you put your money under the mattress, someone can take the money, possibly your husband, if we believe that men are bad, which some people tend to be convinced of. It's not necessarily my view, but we can talk about that. And in fact, I'll give you some evidence that maybe they are, maybe they are not. If you invest in animals, the problem is that they can die or they can have diseases. Also, you have to feed them, so maybe it's costly to have these animals. The susus, well, they are nice, but maybe they're never going to come back with your money. Or even if they do come back, in general, they charge a fee. So essentially, saving with a susu is equivalent to saving at a negative interest rate or having negative returns on your savings, which we don't really like so much. And then the Roscas are also risky because, again, the person who gets the pot the first meeting might never come back. So the Rosca can just collapse. The merry-go-round can work until it's your turn to get the pot, and then no one is around to give the money. So this, the fact that these informal saving mechanisms are risky or costly leads us to the question of, is it the case that these women would be better off if they did have access to a bank account? And is there an unmet demand for formal banking services? And if there is one, what are the barriers to savings that these bank accounts really help overcome? So the short answer to these questions is that yes, there is a demand for bank accounts among women in Sub-Saharan Africa. And these accounts seem to help primarily because they help women protect money from others. Now, because I have hopefully 13 more minutes before I'm kicked off the stage, I'm going to give you the long answer today, which is going to be through reviewing 2 studies that I've been conducting in Kenya with Jonathan Robinson, who is a professor of economics at UC Santa Cruz and an affiliate of SEGA. So the first study is on banking on women, but literally. And I'm going to show you that market women can benefit from access to formal bank accounts. What do I mean by a market woman? A market woman is like one of these 2 women on these pictures. Essentially, it's a woman who sells vegetables or fruits on the market. And these women have a very, very simple business model. They wake up in the morning, they take the cash that they have under the mattress, they go to a wholesaler, they buy a crate of tomato, they go to the retail market, they sell their tomatoes until they're done with their crate, and then they go home, and the next day they start over. So what we did is that we worked with about 200 of these women in Kenya, and we randomly offered half of them the ability to get access to a bank account. And the bank that we worked with was really not a fancy bank. It was a really small bank. It was a village bank. Here's a picture of it. It's called the Bumala Financial Services Association in Western Kenya. And as you can see, it's the village bank that you can trust. And the bank account that this bank offered cost $6 to open. And $6 is a lot of money for poor people. So at the time we showed up there, literally no one in the village actually had opened an account in the bank. That's why they were having a relaunch. I don't know if you can see on the chalkboard here, but it wasn't working so well for them. The reason why it also is that, so the primary reason why people did not have a bank account is that they couldn't open pay the opening fee. But the thing is that the accounts that this bank provided were really crappy. They didn't pay any interest on the savings, but then on top of it, they charged withdrawal fees. So de facto, when you save in this bank account, you get a negative return. And as we said before, we don't really like that very much. But despite that, we decided, okay, let's see what happens when you enable women to get one of these accounts. And if they do use them, it's going to mean that, in fact, without an account, they face an even greater negative return. So we collected data on about 100 women to whom we gave an account, and another control group of women who didn't get the account over 6 months. And what did we find? Well, we found that even though these accounts were really bad, women were using them quite a bit. So in the control group, on average, we find that people were saving 1 cent per day in a bank account. That's probably because none of them had an account. Like one of them had an account and she would save a little bit on it. But so essentially the control group did not have any savings in banks. In the red bar is for the average in the treatment group, what we call the intention to treat estimator. And we find that there women were saving close to 10 cents US cents a day, or 7.89 Kenyan shillings per day in the bank account. But now this masks some important heterogeneity. In truth, in our treatment group, the women who got the account, only half of them were really using the account. So one half was not using them, and the other half was using them. If you look specifically at the half using the accounts, for them on average, they were saving close to 20 cents per day in the account. And that's actually quite an important number when you look at the livelihood of these women. So these women, some of them, at least half of them, were using these accounts. What did they do with the money? Well, we find that having access to an account helped them increase the scope of their business. So essentially, they were saving in the account slowly, 20 cents at the time, and then after a while, they had enough cash accumulated in the account to take out their savings and then invest and go. When they would go to the wholesaler now, instead of buying 1 crate of tomatoes, they could buy 2 of them and make more money out of that. So again, if we focus on the average impact, we find that the average investment in the business increased from $3.20 per day to $4.70. But when we look at those who are actively using the account, the investment in the business actually doubled. Then the question is, okay, what does it do for these women? Well, we can look at the extent to which these accounts help them increase how much resources they have at hand. For that, we can proxy. We can look at their total expenditure as the proxy for their income, and we find that having the account again increased women's ability to spend money, to have money and spend it for themselves and their family. It increased by about 15%. If you look at the average effect, and if you focus on those that were using the account actively, it's more something around 35%. The other result that we have is that women in our context are very vulnerable to health shocks. In particular, malaria is very common, And the standard response when you face a health shock and you have the business model I've just described is that, okay, you're sick that day, you cannot go to work, and on top of it, you have to buy drugs, so you use your working capital to buy the drug, which means that once you're feeling better, you don't have cash anymore to actually go to the wholesale market to buy the crate of tomatoes because you spend the money on the malaria drugs. So when you have access to an account, it helps you build somewhat of a buffer stock of savings, and you can use that to treat yourself instead of having to use your working capital. So that prevents you from going back to zero and then being stranded with no money at all to go back to the wholesale market. And we do find evidence that on the days women were sick, they were withdrawing money from their account to be able to cope with that shock. So what do we conclude from this first study? We conclude that there is a demand for formal bank accounts among rural female macro entrepreneurs. Not all of them. We only found about half of them were using the accounts, but that's still a not negligible number. We find that these accounts help women grow their businesses and protect them against health shocks in particular. The poverty reduction we find was quite rapid because we see relatively big effects within 6 months. We find that the average expenditure of these women go above the standard $2 a day poverty threshold within 6 months. So that's pretty remarkable. But of course, this is a small study. We were graduate students when we started. We had very little money. We have only 200 people in the sample. Why should you believe me about this? Well, I think it's important to validate these findings, and that's why now that we've become grown-ups and we could get more resources, we are doing similar studies on a larger sample in other countries. We are replicating this in Kenya with 2,000 households, as well as in Uganda, Malawi, Chile, and the Philippines. So we'll have more results on that soon. There are some questions, though, that this study raised. And the question is, why did these accounts, which, as I said, are really not good, they have a negative interest rate, why did they have such an appeal and impact, especially since women have all this informal mechanism that they can use to save? So the study number 2 that I'm going to talk about very briefly tries to tease out the importance of potential barriers to savings. So this second study is going to show that women need very simple tools, just storage facilities, to help them say no to money demands from others. And in fact, if you think about potential barriers to savings, we like to think about them into 2 categories. There are interpersonal barriers, which is the fact that other people prevent you to save. You can think about relatives, friends, and neighbors asking for money. And it has been documented that there are some strong sharing norms that make it very difficult for people to say no when they are asked for money. And in particular, you could imagine that husbands might be the ones asking their wives to share their resources, and they might have very different saving goals from the women. The other type of barriers would be intrapersonal barriers, which is barriers, my future selves are the problem, in the sense that I really want to save, and I do manage to put some money on the mattress, but myself of tomorrow is going to be tempted to spend the money on something that's not really my saving goal. So I really want to be able to save for a bed net over the long run, but maybe before I get there and I have enough money to buy the bed net, I'm going to be tempted to spend the money on something else. So we want to be able to tease out the importance of these 2 barriers, and in particular, going back to this picture here, I wanted to look at the barriers to saving that prevent women to invest in their health. In other research that I have done, I found that women are very willing to use a mosquito net to protect themselves from malaria if they can get one for free or at a very cheap price. But if they have to pay a little bit of money for it, it's very hard for women to manage to put together enough cash to buy the bed net. And when you ask them, why is that? They say, well, it's just very difficult to save. So we wanted to see what we can do to help women just put together this little bit of cash to be able to invest in health products, and to also be able to have the cash that they need saved to deal with health emergencies like the one I just described before, to avoid having them draw down their business inventory, for example. So what did we do in this study? We didn't work with the banks this time. We just designed our own saving products, and we designed 3 different products that's going to have different features and help us figure out what barriers really matter. So the first product is the dumbest product ever. It's a safe box. It's just essentially, it's like a piggy bank. It's a metal box with a lock and then a slit through which you can put money. And the advantage is that you don't have to keep the key together with the box. You can keep the box in your home and then walk away with the key, and that makes the money really safe. Other people cannot take it from you. The lockbox is the same as the safe box, but this time you don't even have the key. We kept the key, the program officers, we kept the key, we just gave you the box, and this time it's really like a piggy bank, because even if you want to take the money out, you cannot. Once you've put it through the slip, you just cannot get it until you call us and we open the box for you. And we ask people to set a savings goal for themselves. So in both of these groups, we ask people, what do you want to save for? And we really prime them so that we would save for health. So for example, women would say, yeah, I really want to buy a bed net. And we say, okay, how much does that cost? $6. All right, then it's your saving goal, it's a bed net, and we are not going to open the damn box until you have $6 in it. Okay, so that was the idea. And then we have the health savings account. This is very similar to the health savings account that we are familiar with in the US, which is essentially an individual account in which you can save money that's earmarked for health emergencies. And we did this through ROSCA, so essentially it was the treasurer of your ROSCA that would be in charge of keeping that cash for you and would not give you the money unless you have a true health emergencies. So the different features of these products at the safe box helps keep money from others, but it doesn't constrain what you can spend the money on. So if you have self-control issues, it's not going to help you. But what's good about it is that the money is going to be available to deal for emergencies. And since health emergencies are very common, people might actually like that. The lockbox helps keep the money from both yourself and from others. But the money is earmarked for a specific savings goal, which means that it's not accessible for emergencies. And then the health savings account keeps the money from others as well as from yourself. And it's in earmarks for health emergencies, which is something that people want. So what do we find? We look at two types of outcomes. First, we look at how much money people spent on preventative health products in the 12 months that elapsed between the time we get them these different products and the time and when we followed up. And so we have a control group where we didn't give people anything, and then we randomized who got the safe box, who got the lock box, who got the HSA plan. And when we first look at the product that were really geared towards people buying a bed net or a water treatment product, we found that people who got access to a safe box were much more likely to have managed to buy one of these products, health products, in the past 12 months. So the amount of money people spent on preventative health products increased from $3.4 US dollars in the control group to $5.7 US dollars in the safe box group. That's a 65% increase, and it's very significant statistically. In the lockbox group, we see a little bit of an increase, but that's not statistically different from the control group. And when we ask people, what's up with the lockbox, don't you like it? They said, well, you know, it's a nice thing, but the problem is that the money is not accessible when I have a health emergency. So I cannot really save in it very much because I'm very afraid that, you know, if something bad happens to me, I don't have access to my savings. So people were, you know, very happy with the lockbox, but the lockbox seemed to be a little bit too binding for them. When we look at the health savings account now, looking at people's inability to afford medical treatment in the past 3 months. So here, when you see a lower bar, it's a good thing because it means that people are less unable, so more able to treat with health shocks. We find that about 30% of people in the control group, when they have a health shock, they do not have enough cash to deal with the shock. They do not have enough cash for the proper treatment. This went down to 21% in the safe box group, so people did have cash on hand in the box, and further down to 17%, so it almost halved the likelihood that you cannot deal with health emergencies if you were in the HSA group, which is a relatively big impact. The other result that we have from this study is that married women benefited more than unmarried women. So this is the guys are bad slide, because clearly it seems like women's ability to protect their money from their husbands was one of the contributing factors. But we also see very long-lasting impacts. So recently, we just went back to the field and traced some of these women, and it has been 2 years since we ever went back and looked at what was going on, and 3 years since we gave them the lock boxes or the safe boxes, and we found 60% of women still had the box and the key. And 65% of them in the HSA were still contributing to the HSA. So very long-lasting, take-up of these products. So the conclusions from study 2 is that very simple storage mechanisms. You don't even have to get a bank account, just something as stupid, if I may say, as a safe box, which costs $2. So you would say, well, people should be able to buy it for themselves, but $2 is actually already hard for people to save. So if you just help them get started with a safe box, it really actually helps them increase their savings and their ability to invest in very important things such as preventative health products or emergency funds for health shocks. And the main channel that we've identified, I don't have time to show you the evidence for that, but the main channel that we've identified is really that these simple storage mechanisms help shield money from others. And both demands from the spouse and other households and other network members are very important in preventing women to invest in what they want to invest in. So locking money away is very attractive for women as long as they can access that money for emergency. So I'm out of time, so I'm just going to say one more thing. Self-discipline, which is this problem of lack of control, is often mentioned as an issue. We find that it's a relatively minor issue in our context. So to wrap up completely, I think both studies suggest to us, at least so far, very simple saving devices can have very high impacts on women's ability to save and to invest, not only in their business, but also in their health, and in more generally in things that are good for growth. And we are doing a lot of work currently to look at the impact of enabling savings on other outcomes, such as business creation, investments in agricultural technologies, and investments in education. Thank you very much.
I was wondering, have you seen any opportunities for more sophisticated tools such as mobile money, mobile technology, especially with companies such as M-Pesa being so prevalent in Kenya, and looked at that as being a tool, a more sustainable tool than the box?
No, so that's a very interesting point, and there's a lot of work being done on this currently, not by myself, but by Tabitha Suri at MIT, among others. In our settings, it's very surprising because we anticipated people to be taking up these things quite a bit. So when we started our replication study in Kenya itself just about a year ago, and we did a survey, we anticipated very high usage rates of M-Pesa. So M-Pesa is really essentially you can save on your mobile phone. So you go to a small retailer store and you give money to that person, and then it goes into a machine, and then it's stored on your phone, so you can go to any other retailer and give your phone number and withdraw money from your account, kind of. I mean, in a summary. Anyway, so the point is that we found that people were using this M-Pesa very much for transfers, so to send money to relatives. But for saving itself, as a saving device, people didn't like it so much. And they said, well, what I don't like about it is that if I lose my SIM card, which is inside the phone, or if my phone is stolen, how do I make sure I don't lose the money? They also said that there were limits to how much they could save on each specific numbers. The withdrawal fees are not negligible, and there is no interest paid, so it's, again, a negative returns way of saving. So in our context in Western Kenya, we don't see it being used as a saving device yet, but it's a very, mobile technology in the sense that it's being, retooled every couple of months. So it's possible that M-Pesa is going to change its design pretty soon and make it more amenable to saving. Yeah. Sorry.
So given that you identified sharing norms as the primary barrier to saving, I was wondering if you looked at any of the possible unintended consequences of giving women the power to say no, specifically relationship power, domestic violence, and social standing.
So we did not look at that. So that's a good point.
Working? Yeah. Thank you for the presentation. I was wondering if you are, I heard that you're saying to replicate this to other countries like Uganda and Chile. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about the sample size that you have used and in terms of regional distribution as well, making the sample, because you're going to try to extrapolate this to other countries?
No, so exactly. So the reason why we think it's very important to replicate these studies in other contexts is that we did this with 200 market women, market vendors in Western Kenya. It could be that the effects are very different for other types of occupations. In fact, I didn't have time to talk about it, but we did have a group of men in our bank account experiment. They were bicycle taxi drivers, and we found that they were not interested in the account whatsoever. So we can't really say it's a men versus women story because they had very different occupations. But we don't think that necessarily everybody is going to benefit from this so much. So that's why we think it's very important to look at much larger segments of the population, all different types of occupation, including farmers, subsistence farmers, the extent to which they could benefit from accounts in terms of investing more in fertilizer, for example, or whether maybe for them it's useless because they make money only once a year when they harvest, and they keep their harvest in grain and don't cash it out. So we are looking at this typically in all the countries I listed. We try to have a sample of 2,000 households, and it's very often close to half of them are subsistence farmers, as we saw from the previous presentation. Close to half of the population in most of these countries is in farming. And then we also try to make sure we have business owners and casual laborers and things like that. Sorry.
Do you discern between the risk of the different savings mechanisms and the liquidity constraints? Like, Americans are familiar with banks only being as trustworthy as the bankers. So is there a sense that maybe sometimes keeping money under your mattress could be more less risky than, in fact, giving it to someone like you in these rural settings? And how do you discern that?
No, that's a very good point. In particular, in Uganda, where we are doing one of these replication studies, there's a lot of mistrust of banks, in part because a lot of banks were fake banks, and they would just collect people's money for a while, and then they would take off. So that's a very important issue, and one of the reasons why we are trying to look at replication in different countries and try to understand what are the ways through which you can rebuild trust in financial institutions if that trust has been lost because of bad previous experiences. So we make sure that we partner with very reliable banks when we do these studies, so to make sure that there is as much trust as possible. But that's an important point.